Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We represent the teams at Google that have been working on methodologies to monitor real-world performance in healthcare AI. We wanted to share some of our work with you all today. Let's start with some introductions.
My name is Lou, and I'm currently a senior software engineer and technical lead at Google. I lead machine learning model development and performance evaluation for medical devices in both pre-market and post-market phases.
I'm Anne. I currently is a software engineer and tech lead on the clinical infrastructure project at Google. I lead the development of post-market monitoring and the de-identification pipeline for Google clinical devices.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jay. When I'm not professionally photobombing a giraffe, I am a senior regulatory affairs specialist at Google. My focus is on providing guidance to product teams related to the unique regulatory and security landscapes within which innovative solutions are being developed to face some of the challenges in healthcare. Okay, so we would like to keep things very simple. In this presentation, we will be walking you through why we need monitoring, what a monitoring system looks like, and eventually we would like to end with a few case studies of how we have implemented this in practice. Okay, so starting off, and why do we need to monitor? The best endorsement for the need for AI monitoring in healthcare is a quote from the FDA itself, presented on screen. In October, real-world monitoring was recognized by the FDA, the MHRA, and by Health Canada as a guiding principle of good machine learning practice for medical device development. This identifies and clearly requires the development of novel ways to effectively monitor real-world performance of regulated healthcare AI. Furthermore, as mentioned in the AI/ML SaMD action plan, and I quote, gathering performance data on the real-world use of the SaMD may allow manufacturers to understand how their products are being used, identify opportunities for improvements, and respond proactively. So, this is something that has been signaled as a focus for the US FDA, and they're consciously trying to solve for this problem as well. For context, the stage of the product lifecycle that we are focusing on today would be with respect to a production stage AI model. This is a chart that should be very familiar to the industry, pulled from the FDA's proposed regulatory framework discussion paper for AI/ML devices. The pipeline we're discussing here is a tool that can enable the tracking and evaluation of real-world datasets. So, to further specify the problem we're trying to answer here, it is the FDA's request for feedback on what additional mechanisms exist for real-world performance monitoring of SaMD. Before we proceed with solutions, I would like to provide some more context. I would like to use the analogy of traffic lights and traffic predictors in navigation tools. Traffic lights are a legal requirement, while traffic predictors are an assistive function. What do I mean by that? Traffic predictions can help you choose a route to your destination, but you would not choose to run a red light. In that same way, real-world data monitoring is not the same as post-market surveillance. Like a traffic light, regulatory surveillance data means specific things, such as clinical studies, 522 surveillance requirements, adverse event reporting, etc. These are requirements that must be followed. But like traffic predictions on your navigation app, AI monitoring systems can provide us with rich data sets from the real-world use case that are useful to gauge the performance of the AI. But sometimes this data by itself will not have the whole picture or consider the context in which the device is being used. This is where applicability of the data comes in, and each variation should be evaluated for validity. Thus, regulatory surveillance and real-world performance monitoring are related and influence each other, but they're not the same. So with that context in mind, generically speaking, the methodology we're presenting here today is a way to acquire evidence from actual AI deployments and assess them against a reference standard, allowing us to see in real time how the AI model is performing. Okay, so what are the reasons to monitor? This is by no means an exhaustive list, but here are some key points. AI performance is influenced by non-AI factors. We have learned through our deployments in different geographies that although the product is designed in a certain way, there are just a myriad of factors when it comes to user implementation that can impact the product's performance. For instance, even factors such as the size of a clinical room for the patient, where an image was taken, can impact the AI device that just evaluates these images. Speaking about AI model variation, there is a naturally expected variation of model performance due to the inherent difference in how the model was trained versus the real-world patient population that it is seeing. A good model captures the essential patterns in the training data, which allows it to adapt properly to previously unseen data. But there are limitations to how well any model can generalize. For instance, a natural change in the population itself presents a further challenge in ensuring AI adapts well. This is where monitoring comes in. Speaking of monitoring, monitoring is only a part of mixed methods research, which is essential to understand overall impact. As we touched upon before with the traffic light and prediction analogy, monitoring can provide us with an early warning system to investigate issues, but it is not the sole reason to take an action, report a finding, or identify improvements. And finally, monitoring provides us with some rich data sets that provide certain benefits over standard regulatory surveillance requirements. Let's explore that a bit more. Okay, so at this stage, we should compare the kind of data we receive as real-world data, traffic prediction, against the post-market surveillance, traffic light. Our process is always additional to regulatory requirements, such as complaint investigations, CAPAs, non-conformances, etc. Data, so speaking about data, the data we collect ultimately depends upon the product itself, as it will be from actual usage, for instance, case data, model output, metadata from medical images. We will be unpacking this via case studies on a particular product later on in the slides, but for now, contrast this against descriptive tools like complaints and internal quality control metrics, which are reported by human users. Speaking about evidence, we gladly acknowledge that RWD monitoring is not the same as a well-controlled study. For instance, the reference standards for geography, intended use, etc. will be different, but rather we are considering it similar to analytical validation per the FDA's own SaMD guidance, whereby we compare the performance of the model against human experts. Our goal in highlighting this is to show that our usage of RWD still enables better monitoring when combined with the standard PMS model, which may provide just a report of the incident itself. Thus, it helps to balance the pre-market evidence with the post-market evidence to ideally enable product improvements without raising questions of safety and effectiveness. And finally, about cadence. The insights we glean are real-time, and the actions we can take are proactive rather than reactive. Historically, post-market surveillance relies upon an incident being reported by a customer or a production issue to force an action. But with this combined methodology, we can have direct objective comparison against a suitable reference standard on an ongoing basis. So this is very similar to the pathway for continuous learning by leveraging real-world performance as suggested by the FDA. Speaking of continuous learning, here's our adaptation of the actual regulatory guidance. So we built upon the FDA and IMDRF's guidance. Starting from the left top, the pipeline enables the collection of real-world evidence, an initial assessment leading to a deeper clinical evaluation to generate new clinical evidence. Please note that I use terms like data and evidence in motion here. This evidence can then inspire the iterative development and maintenance of the AI model. A couple salient points to note here. Monitoring is intentionally designed into the workflow. The data we collect is embedded and collected as a part of routine clinical care, obviously with explicit consent. This data also has a potential to be aggregated across other devices, other manufacturers, enabling a shared system to inform multiple stakeholders. Okay, so that is enough of the why. I'm going to hand you off to the actually smart people who make this happen. So take it away, Lou.
It is perhaps more useful to discuss real-world monitoring in the context of a medical device product. So to that end, I'd like to introduce you to ARDA, a machine learning-based software as a medical device. ARDA works by receiving medical images from fundus cameras and running AI models on them to screen for signs of diabetic retinopathy or diabetic macular edema. ARDA is a CE marked and in use in EU and India. ARDA has also been used in a prospective clinical study in Thailand, where we work with healthcare experts and researchers to understand the feasibility of using AI within the screening program. So as a modeling engineer, what are the metrics that we want to continuously monitor for ARDA? So in the case of ARDA, the real world data we're used here are primarily the fundus camera images. There are 4 metrics that we want to track: sensitivity, specificity, clinically important condition miss rate, and image quality. And I'm going to go through each of them. Sensitivity refers to proportion of patients who have DR or DME and have been correctly received a positive result from ARDA. Specificity refers to proportion of patients who do not have DR and DME and have correctly received a negative result from ARDA. Clinically important condition miss rate. Those are the conditions that are especially important to catch so that patients can receive timely treatments. And that's something we would like to monitor. Finally, image quality. Image quality is important for us, as you will see in a case study later in the presentation. Image quality, low image quality, such as lesions blocked by artifacts, can cause the model to make incorrect prediction. So we want to monitor image quality so that we can identify sites that have variations and work with them to improve imaging technique. Additionally, we also support breakdowns by dimensions, such as sites and time range, to get a finer grain view. And we'll talk about how we do this from a technical perspective in the later slides. Now I'm going to hand it over to Anne, our infrastructure tech lead, to tell you more about details of the monitoring pipeline.
So here is the overview of a typical real-world evidence monitoring workflow. The details may vary based on what medical devices we are monitoring. So first, we collect patient case information, images, and ML grades from different sites. We then run the sampling based on various metrics. Those selected cases will then be used for downstream analysis. To protect patient privacy, we perform the identification on those selected cases. After that, we send the case information for human grading. In most cases, those humans will be medical specialists so that we can collect human grading on the cases, and then we use those ground truths for the case diagnosis. Once human finished grading, we aggregate the ML grades together with human grades and case information. Based on the aggregated data, we surface those information to a dashboard and break it down into multiple dimensions. ML engineers from Lou's team will then analyze the data and assess if we need to do model retraining. In the next few slides, I will talk about some of the highlights and learnings within each subcomponent of the workflow. In this step, we do both sampling and filtering. First, we slice the user data based on the user consent. And then we sample cases based on the metrics that Lou mentioned before. Those metrics will be useful for monitoring the device performance. Lastly, we filter the duplicate image out by checking the image checksum to avoid oversampling the same images multiple times. Then I'll talk about the identification. So why we do the identification? We want to protect user data by preventing the identifying information from going into downstream systems. We adhere to the industrial standards to remove the identifying information in both case data and images. And then I will talk about the human grading. The human grading piece is the clinical evaluation component mentioned in the SaMD.If guidance document that we use to guide our activities, essentially allowing us to analyze and appraise the real-world evidence that we collect. There are 3 flavors of human grading we are currently using or plan to do. The first one is overread. We ask medical specialists to re-evaluate the case so that later we can compare the grades and confidence from human and the ML model. To reduce the human bias or error during the process, we use adjudication for graders to go through multiple rounds of grading until they reach consensus. Or we will ask multiple graders to grade on the same case. The second one is ML accuracy. We ask graders to provide binary answers on whether ML grades and confidence are accurate. The third one is image quality. So we ask graders to provide ground truth on 2 questions. The first one is the image quality high enough to be gradable? Some of the dimensions to consider are lighting condition, blurriness, etc. And the second question is, did the image quality model misclassify the image types? For example, the model may classify a cat image into a skin image. The last part is the metrics and dashboard. The aggregation pipeline aggregates the human grades, ML grades, case data into a formatted data structure, and then we surface those aggregated data to a dashboard. We apply k-anonymity before we release the data to the dashboard, so that under any metrics, there are at least k people who share the same metrics value. This will reduce the risk of re-identifying individuals who are the subject of the data. And then ML engineers from Lu's team will use metrics in the dashboard to analyze the model performance and assess if we need to do retraining for the model. So in order to produce the correct model performance evaluation, we need to ensure that the pipeline is working as intended. There are a few ways to ensure the pipeline health. First, we simulate the whole monitoring workflow with test data and verify that the pipeline is behaving as expected. The tests run periodically and runs through the entire service stack. It sends the alert to engineer team when unexpected results are produced. We also check the correctness of a particular subcomponent in the workflow. Since DID involves image processing to remove identifying information from images, we use before and after test images to verify the correctness of image processing algorithm. When it comes to human grading, Eng team are alerted on too many skipped tasks so that we can check if there are any broken tasks sent to the graders. The whole pipeline is built to be Part 11 compliant. We follow the computer system validation process to meet the requirements on data management. All the access, creation, and mutation to clinical data are auditable. For data access, we do not allow direct human right access to the database. They can only run the job where the code is checked in. For read access for debugging purpose, we will require justification and approval. We also follow the standard deletion, wipeout, and retention policy because we put user data control first. Next, Lu will walk you through some of the case studies on how we use analysis result from the real-world monitoring in practice.
Now let me walk you through 3 case studies with our DR screening product, ARDA. As mentioned before, ARDA is a CE mark product that is being used clinically in EU and India for detecting referable DR and referable DME. So for this specific case study, we were able to leverage real-world evidence to validate the overall performance in real world. We conducted pre-market studies with the following performance for referable DR and DME. And here's what we saw in terms of sensitivity and specificity on the left. Referable DR and sensitivity and specificity were 90% and 98% respectively. Referable DME sensitivity and specificity were 90% and 86% respectively. On the right is the performance in post-market. So far, we have seen similar, if not better, performance in post-market in India. And I want to reiterate that the numbers shown here are provided as an example, since we're continuously running real-world evidence monitoring. Here is another case study on ungradable images. ARDA has a safety function where if the model is unable to grade the image due to low image quality, ARDA will tell the imaging operator that the image is ungradable. Ungradable images could be due to the scale of operators, lighting conditions, off-label use, and etc. For this case study, we detected an increase in ungradable images from specific sites before site reported a problem. As Jay mentioned before, this insight allows us to take proactive actions. We reach out to the sites to conduct stakeholder interviews to understand the causes of images being ungradable. And we were able to work with the sites to improve the imaging success. Finally, we have a case study where we observe performance variation during site initialization. During site initialization, where we observe performance variation, there was limited customer feedback for ARDA related to performance. Once we noticed the performance variation from the dashboard that Anne was talking before, we initiated investigation proactively, and we leveraged real-world evidence data to understand causes along with the site operator. We worked through various potential causes of observed performance variation, and we were finally able to narrow down to the root cause, which is unfamiliarity of the new camera setup in the site. We work with partners to improve operator training. Finally, we continue monitoring DR performance through established monitoring process. And as the sample size of patient increased, we noticed a consistent performance. In summary, as mentioned earlier, real-world monitoring is now officially a guiding principle endorsed by the FDA, MHRA, and Canada to inform the development of good machine learning principles. And by intentionally making it as a part of the product lifecycle, we can use real-world evidence monitoring to proactively assess the performance of the device, as well as gain valuable data to enable retraining of the model. By building in ways to conduct mixed method research into the monitoring pipeline, we can fill the gap in understanding between pre-market validation and the real-world evidence. And finally, as mentioned in the infrastructure slides, protecting user privacy and usage of industry standard practices, such as CSV and Part 11 for system validation, should be key requirements for the pipeline itself. Thank you all for your listening, and let us know if you have any questions.